In the heart of Hawaii, Maya Kalua's life takes an unexpected turn after a missed bus leads her into the path of Colton Hayes, a mysterious millionaire with a past as complex as his charm. What starts as a simple ride in the rain soon turns into a life-altering journey of love, dreams, and second chances. But Maya faces a tough choice. Stay on her beloved island or chase a new opportunity. Will love be enough to keep them together? Dive into this heartfelt, emotional story of courage, destiny, and discovering what truly matters. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain had not yet started, but the air already warned of it. Thick and still, it wrapped around Maya Kalua like a damp sheet as she stepped out of the cafe and into the fading twilight. The last customers had trickled out half an hour ago, their flip-flops slapping against the tiled floor as they offered lazy mahalos and half-hearted tips. Maya had smiled politely through it all, her apron streaked with coffee stains and her feet aching from another double shift. Now, as she wiped her palms on the fabric one last time before stuffing it into her canvas toady, all she wanted was to make the last bus, get home, and forget about espresso shots, flirtatious tourists, and the lingering smell of cinnamon buns. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting a deep orange glow over the palm-lined streets. Maya quickened her pace, weaving through narrow alleys she knew by heart. The familiar scent of grilled pineapple and salt air hung low, mixing with the far-off rumble of thunder. Her heart beat a little faster, not just from the hurry, but from a gnawing sense that tonight, something was off. She turned the final corner, just in time to see the bus pulling away from the curb, its brake lights casting a red glare across the wet pavement. No, 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 no. Wait, Maya called out, waving both arms like a madwoman. But the driver didn't stop. He didn't even look back. She slowed to a halt, hands falling limply to her sides. For a second, she just stood there, soaked in disbelief. And then the rain began. It came in sharp, heavy drops, tropical and unapologetic, soaking through her t-shirt and jeans within seconds. She gasped, wrapping her arms around herself, more out of instinct than warmth. The wind kicked up, sending her damp hair whipping into her face. Her flip-flops squeaked against the wet asphalt as she stepped under a thin awning that did little to help. Great, just perfect. She glanced down the empty street. The next bus wouldn't come for at least another hour, maybe longer with the storm rolling in. Walking home was out of the question, especially with the roads already slick and unlit past the main strip. She let out a long, frustrated breath, ready to brave the cold for a few more minutes, when the low hum of an engine crept through the sound of falling rain. Headlights pierced the mist. A black pickup truck slowed to a stop at the curb beside her. Tinted windows, big tires, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in her sleepy part of town. The driver's side window rolled down, and for a moment, Maya couldn't see much. Then a voice, low, smooth, with a southern drawl, cut through the night like a warm knife. "You look like you could use a ride." Maya blinked. Her instincts flared instantly. Stranger, truck, night. She should say no. Absolutely not. She should turn around and wait it out in the cafe's back storage room like a sensible person. But then the wind hit again. Harder this time, sending a shiver racing down her spine and reminding her just how soaked and miserable she was. The man leaned slightly forward. He was handsome. Infuriatingly so, with rain-dampened hair falling across his forehead and a confident ease in his posture. His white button-down was rolled at the sleeves, revealing tanned forearms and calloused hands. Not a tourist, she thought, too relaxed. Not a local either, too polished. "I don't usually take rides from strangers," she said, eyeing him warily. He chuckled, one brow raised. "And I don't usually offer them. Guess we're both breaking the rules tonight?" Her eyes narrowed. She was cold, tired, and standing in a downpour. The truck looked dry, warm, safe, well, safer than hypothermia. She sighed. "If I get murdered, it's on you." The man grinned, reaching over to pop the passenger door open. "Deal." Maya hesitated for half a second longer, then stepped off the curb and into the unknown. As she climbed inside, the door shutting with a soft thud behind her, she had no idea that this storm, and this stranger, were about to change her life in ways she never could have imagined. Warmth wrapped around Maya the moment she closed the truck door behind her. The soft hum of the engine, the subtle scent of leather and something faintly spicy, maybe cologne, rifted through the cab, cocooning her from the chaos outside. Rain still hammered the roof like a war drum, but inside it felt like another world entirely. She shivered involuntarily, the air-conditioned breeze cutting against her soaked clothes, and turned slightly toward the man behind the wheel. He didn't look at her right away. His hands, large and steady, rested casually on the steering wheel as he pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly onto the road. Only once they'd rounded the first corner did he glance at her, his eyes an unsettling shade of blue. There was something unreadable in them, amused, maybe, but also focused. She couldn't decide if that made her more nervous or more intrigued. Without a word, he reached into the center console and pulled out a folded white towel. He handed it to her with a nod. Maya hesitated for a beat before accepting it. The fabric was thick and soft, nothing like the threadbare ones they used at the cafe. She pressed it to her face, wiping away the rain clinging to her skin and hair. "Thanks," she murmured. "No problem," he replied, eyes flicking back to the road. "Figured it was either that or let you drip all over the seat." Maya cracked a reluctant smile, wrapping the towel around her shoulders like a shawl. She watched the windshield wipers swish back and forth, trying to get a read on him. Most guys who offered rides in the middle of a storm had an angle, but this one, he was calm, casual, like he did this every day. "You're prepared," she said, half suspicious, half impressed. "I don't like being uncomfortable," he said simply, a faint smirk on his lips. The silence that followed wasn't exactly awkward, just curious. Maya tightened the towel around her and sat back, watching the darkened streets roll by through the rain. They passed shuttered surf shops, quiet homes, the distant glow of tiki torches outside a beachfront bar. The world looked softer through misty glass. "So," he said after a while, his voice steady, "where am I taking you?" Maya hesitated. Part of her still couldn't believe she'd gotten to a stranger's truck. Tantalus Drive. His brows rose. "Up the mountain." She nodded slowly. "That's a hell of a hike from here." He let out a low whistle. "Didn't have much of a choice," she muttered, suddenly feeling self-conscious. She hated how it sounded, like an excuse. He glanced at her then, more carefully this time. "You live up there?" "Yeah, with my mom and little sister." His hands tightened just slightly on the wheel, but his expression didn't change. Maya studied his profile. Strong jawline, a shadow of stubble, that same unshakable confidence. He looked like someone used to getting his way, but not in an obnoxious way. More like someone who knew the value of silence. "Look," she said abruptly, "I appreciate the ride. Really, but I don't usually do this." He shot her a quick glance. "Get into strange trucks with suspiciously charming guys in the rain?" She huffed out a laugh. "Exactly." "Well," he said, eyes twinkling as he turned onto a quieter road, "I don't usually pick up wet baristas in the middle of tropical storms, so I'd say we're even." Despite herself, Maya smiled. She tucked a damp curl behind her ear, her gaze dropping to the floor mat. The rain thudded harder, against the windows now, the wind whistling faintly through the door seams. Yet, with every passing minute, her guard slipped just a little more. Then, suddenly, the truck lurched. Colton, she had learned his name only moments earlier, let out a quiet curse, easing the vehicle to the shoulder. "What happened?" Maya asked, sitting up straighter. "Flat," he muttered, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Perfect timing." She stared as he pushed open the door and stepped out into the downpour. For a second, she considered staying put. But then she saw him crouched by the wheel, rain pouring off his hair, his shirt already clinging to his back. Grumbling, Maya followed. "You know how to change a tire," he called without looking up. "Do you?" she shot back. He laughed. "Fair." And just like that, there they were, two strangers, kneeling in the rain, hands brushing over lug nuts and soaked wrenches, soaked to the bone, but strangely, not minding it at all. The sun was barely rising when Maya stepped into the cafe the next morning, her hair still damp from the quick rinds she'd taken just before leaving the house. The scent of fresh coffee beans greeted her like a friend. The scent of fresh coffee beans greeted her like a friend. She moved through the routine on autopilot, flipping chairs down, switching on the grinders, stacking pastries in the case. But her hands were slower than usual, her mind annoyingly fixated on one thing, or rather, one person. Colton Hayes. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that ridiculous half-grin of his as they crouched beside his truck in the rain, fumbling with the spare tire and exchanging sarcastic barbs, like they'd known each other for years. She could still feel the brush of his fingers against hers when she passed him the wrench, the jolt of awareness it sent straight through her skin. Stupid, really. She didn't even know the guy. He could have driven straight to the airport and been halfway to Texas by now, and that would be the smart thing to do. So why did her stomach twist every time the doorbell above the entrance jingled? By 10:00 a.m., the cafe was alive with the usual hum of tourists and locals. The espresso machine hissed and steamed as Maya worked behind the counter, her fingers remembering the motions even if her brain didn't. She'd just finished crafting a caramel macchiato when she heard the heavy thud of boots across the wooden floor. Confident, unhurried steps that somehow made her skin prickle before she even turned around. She didn't need to look, she knew. Still, she did. There he was, standing just inside the cafe, dressed more casually than the night before. Navy t-shirt clinging to his frame, dark jeans that had definitely been tailored to him. His hair was slightly tousled, like he hadn't bothered with a mirror, and he was looking at her like she was the only person in the building. Maya's heart jumped, then immediately tripped over itself. She quickly looked down, pretending to wipe the counter. "Oh my God," Malia hissed beside her, elbowing her in the ribs. "Who is that? And why does he look like he walked off a movie set?" Maya winced. "Just take his order." Malia, of course, ignored her entirely and floated up to the register like she was auditioning for The Bachelor. "Aloha. What can I get you?" Colton didn't even glance at the menu. His eyes were still on Maya. "I'll take whatever she recommends." Malia's grin widened. "Oh, so this is personal." Maya shot her a glare and stepped in before the situation spiraled. One Hawaiian pour-over. Coming up, Colton smirked, clearly entertained. "Sounds fancy." "Try not to spill it on your shirt this time," she said flatly, though the corner of her mouth twitched. She turned away to start the pour-over, grateful for something to do with her hands. Carefully, she ground the beans, letting the familiar aroma settle her nerves. She focused on the water's slow, circular descent through the filter, the smell rising rich and bold into the air. For a moment, everything else faded away. When the coffee was done, She slid the cup across the counter. Here. Don't say I never did anything for you. Colton wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug and lifted it to his lips. He took a sip, eyes closing briefly. Damn, he murmured. That's good. Warmth bloomed in her chest, annoyingly, but she quickly shoved it aside. Before he could say anything else, Malia reappeared like a caffeinated hurricane. So, Colton, what brings you to our tiny island? Maya silently prayed for lightning to strike. Business, he said easily. But now, coffee. Malia all but giggled. Well, if you need a tour guide. Malia, Maya warned, don't you have tables to clean? Malia rolled her eyes but finally backed off, leaving them in a silence that wasn't exactly comfortable but definitely wasn't awkward either. Colton took another sip of his coffee and leaned on the counter, his voice low enough so only she could hear. So, if I come back tomorrow, do I get a frequent customer discount? Maya crossed her arms. Absolutely not. He chuckled, eyes glinting. Brutal, but fair. She started to turn away, but just then, her hand brushed his across the counter. It was nothing. A graze. But the electric zing of it shot through her like a pulse. She froze. So did he. Their eyes locked for a split second, and the air between them shifted, thicker somehow. Charged. Then she pulled back, fast. Colton, annoyingly calm, just tilted his head and smiled.
See you tomorrow, Hawaii girl.
Maya exhaled slowly. She already knew he would. The Saturday sun blazed over the Kauai Market Square, casting a warm golden glow over the patchwork of vendor tents and colorful umbrellas. The scent of grilled pineapple and fresh seafood filled the air, mingling with bursts of laughter, waves of conversation, and the rhythmic strumming of a nearby ukulele. Maya weaved effortlessly through the crowd, her woven tote already half full fresh mangoes, taro leaves bundled in banana fibers, and a bundle of crispy manapua she planned to surprise her sister with. It was her only day off this week, and she was determined to enjoy it, one bite and breeze at a time. She was debating whether to grab a fresh coconut or wait until the end of her walk when she spotted him. Colton Hayes. Standing in front of a small food stall, arms crossed, brow furrowed at the menu like it was written in ancient Hawaiian. His t-shirt clung slightly to his back from the heat, and his dark hair looked tousled from the breeze. But what made Maya stop mid-step, heart stalling in the process, was the look on his face. He was squinting at a plate that had just been handed to him, fork hovering like it might bite him first. A laugh bubbled up from her throat before she could stop it. "You look like you're in trouble," she called out. Colton's head snapped up, and when he saw her, a slow, familiar grin spread across his face. "Hawaii girl," he drawled, stepping away from the counter, holding the plate like it might explode. Perfect timing. "I need a translator." Maya shook her head as she approached, already eyeing the dish. "That," she said, nodding toward the green-wrapped bundle, "is la-la." He raised an eyebrow.
That supposed to mean something to me?
"It's pork wrapped in taro leaves," she explained, crossing her arms. A local favorite. His expression was skeptical at best. "And you're telling me this green stuff is edible?" She laughed. Genuinely this time. "Not just edible, it's delicious. But I get it. Texans probably don't eat anything that's not smoked or barbecued." Colton smirked, taking the jab with grace. "Hey, don't underestimate us. We eat vegetables too. Mostly when they're fried, but still." "Shocking," she said, gesturing to the plate. "Go on, try it." He sighed dramatically, like she was sensing him to culinary doom. Still, he speared a bite and popped it into his mouth. He chewed slowly, eyebrows rising as the flavors hit. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "Okay," he said, pointing his fork at her. "That's actually good." "Told you," Maya replied, unable to hide her satisfaction. Colton studied her for a moment, then tilted his head toward the rest of the market. "Since you clearly know what you're doing, how about you show me what else I should be eating?" She hesitated. Her first instinct was to keep moving, stick to her plan, avoid unnecessary conversations with dangerously charming millionaires. But then she saw the glint in his eyes. Hopeful, yes. But then she saw the glint in his eyes. Hopeful, yes, but also something else. Something warm, real. Before she could talk herself out of it, she nodded. "All right, Texas. Let's see if you can handle real Hawaiian food." They strolled side by side, stopping at her favorite stalls. She introduced him to poke bowls and kulolo, made him drink fresh coconut water straight from the shell, and dared him to try poi without wincing. To his credit, he tried everything, even the dishes that made him pause with visible uncertainty. "You're actually not bad at this," she said as he finished a bite of squid luo without so much as a grimace. "I'll take that as a high compliment," he said with mock pride. They walked on, the conversation flowing easily. Colton talked about growing up in Texas, about how his grandfather had started their business empire with nothing but grit and a few oil wells. He shared how he spent summers working ranches instead of vacationing in Europe like the rest of his family. In return, Maya told him about her childhood on the island. How she learned to surf before she could ride a bike. How her mom taught her to stretch every dollar without compromising kindness. How she used to brew pretend lattes in her grandma's old mocha pot when she was 6. For a man with money, Colton didn't act like it. He listened more than he talked, asked questions like they actually mattered, and didn't glance at his phone once. That's why it caught her off guard when the first raindrop landed on her nose. She looked up. The sky had shifted, clouds rolling in faster than expected. Oh, she muttered. Colton followed her gaze. That doesn't look good. And then the sky opened up. Vendors scrambled to cover their stalls. People dashed for shelter. Maya grabbed Colton's wrist and pulled him toward a nearby surf shop with a small overhang. They reached it just as the downpour turned torrential, both of them breathless and completely soaked. Colton ran a hand through his dripping hair, laughing. Well, this wasn't part of the plan. Maya shook her head, shivering, and smiled despite herself. "You really should start checking the forecast." He leaned closer, eyes dancing. "Where's the fun in that?" And suddenly, despite the cold, despite the storm, the space between them felt dangerously warm. The rain had stopped by the time Maya got home that evening, but the dampness still clung to her skin and to her thoughts. She toweled off, slipped into dry clothes, and curled up on the couch, but even the familiar rhythm of her little sister's footsteps upstairs or the smell of Mom's simmering stew in the kitchen couldn't quiet the storm that had taken up residence inside her. It wasn't just the market walk or the food or even the way Colton had laughed like he hadn't in years while dodging raindrops. It was how he looked at her, like she mattered. Like she wasn't just another face in the crowd. And that scared her more than she could admit. The next morning, she was quiet at the cafe. Malia noticed, of course. "You've been weird," her coworker said, while restocking the pastry case. Like extra weird. And not your usual, "don't talk" to me until "I've had coffee kind of weird." Maya didn't respond. She just focused on aligning the banana breads into a neat row, her hands working on autopilot. "So," Malia pressed, leaning against the counter, "spill it." "No," Maya said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, no," he didn't. He texted. Malia grinned, sensing blood in the water. Ooh. Maya didn't answer. Instead, she pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled through the texts. Colton. Morning, Hawaii girl. Coffee today? Colton. Ignoring me, huh? I'll take that as a challenge. Colton. Did I do something? Or are you just playing hard to get? Colton. Maya, talk to me. Each message hit her harder than the last. She wanted to answer. God, did she want to?
Way.
Colton Hayes was a millionaire, a real one. She'd Googled him the night before like a fool, and there he was. Press release after press release, articles naming him as the youngest partner in his family's real estate and oil empire. Photographs of him in suits that cost more than her monthly rent, standing in front of luxury resort developments, smiling with business partners and celebrities. She closed the screen and shoved her phone away. What's going on? Malia asked, not letting up. Maya sighed. He's not who I thought he was. Malia raised a brow. In a good way or a bad way? In, too good for me kind of way. Oh no, Malia groaned. You're not doing that thing again. What thing? That self-sabotage thing where you convince yourself someone's out of your league just because they own shoes without holes in them. Maya gave a weak laugh, but her chest still felt tight. You didn't see the articles, Malia. He's not just rich. He has a private jet and his own brand of sparkling, water-rich. He doesn't belong here. So what? Malia shrugged. Maybe he doesn't belong here, but maybe he wants to. Ever think of that? It was a fair question. But it didn't erase the truth. Maya couldn't ignore. People like him didn't stay in small towns with girls who made minimum wage and dreamed too quietly. People like him didn't marry waitresses. They married heiresses. That night, she didn't reply to his texts. The night after that, she didn't even check her phone. By the third day, she was avoiding the front of the cafe altogether, ducking into the back any time she saw a black truck drive by. She told herself it was for the best, that if she distanced herself now, it would hurt less later, that she was saving him the trouble of having to let her down easy. But every time the cafe door chimed and it wasn't him, her heart sank. And the space behind her ribs grew just a little emptier. On the fourth evening, just as she stepped outside after closing up, she nearly collided with a wall of muscle. Colton. He stood in front of her, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but not angry, just tired. You've been avoiding me, he said, his voice calm but his jaw clenched tightly. Maya's pulse kicked up, but she played it cool. I've been busy. He arched a brow, too busy to answer a single message. She folded her arms. I don't owe you anything, Colton. No, he said evenly, but I think I deserve an explanation. She looked away, blinking fast, then said the words she hadn't wanted to say out loud. You don't belong here. Something flickered in his expression. Hurt. Confusion. What the hell does that mean? It means, she whispered, that you're you, and I'm just a girl who missed the bus. The words hung between them, sharp and irreversible. And then, just like that, he turned. I don't chase people who don't want to be caught. And walked away. The cafe felt quieter without him. It wasn't the kind of silence you noticed right away, not the absence of voices or clinking cups, but something subtler. The weight of an empty seat near the window, the missing glance she'd grown used to catching from across the room, the absence of a smirk that used to appear right before a sarcastic comment. Colton had stopped coming, and Maya, though she told herself That was exactly what she wanted. Felt like someone had reached into her chest and knocked everything out of balance. She moved through the days in a fog, pretending she didn't check the door every time the bell chimed, pretending her heart didn't clench each time it wasn't him. She told herself she was being smart. Protecting herself, she was being smart, protecting herself from something that was never going to last. She reminded herself of the suits, the headlines, the way people had whispered his name after that article dropped. Colton Hayes, the millionaire, the empire heir, the man who could have anyone. And she made minimum wage and brewed coffee. Her biggest investment was the used mocha pot her grandma gave her on her 12th birthday. So why did it feel like she was suffocating? One night, after wiping down the counter and locking the front door, Maya stepped out into the warm evening air and turned, only to stop dead in her tracks. Colton was standing there. He looked different. Not just the worn black t-shirt and jeans, not just the tired look in his eyes, but the way he stood, less like the man who had confidently handed her towels and cracked jokes in the rain, and more like someone who'd been wrestling with something too heavy to carry. Her breath caught. She should turn back inside, should pretend she didn't see him, but she didn't move. Colton didn't either. "You always show up when I least expect it," she said softly, not quite a joke, not quite an accusation. He gave a half-hearted smile. "Maybe you're always expecting me now." She looked down, heart pounding. He took a step forward. "What's going on, Maya?" She hesitated. His brows lifted.
Yeah.
It's a big cafe, well known, better pay, real opportunity. She waited for his reaction. Anger, disappointment, maybe surprise. But Colton just nodded slowly, like he had already braced for it. Okay. That was it. Her throat tightened. Okay? He looked at her with that quiet intensity that always made her feel like he was seeing more than she wanted him to. "Isn't this what you've wanted?" "I think so, but I don't know." He took another step, voice gentler now. "You're scared." She looked away, blinking fast. Yeah, of leaving, and of staying. A long pause stretched between them. Then, gently, he reached out, 2 fingers lifting her chin until her eyes met his. "If this is your dream," he said, voice low but firm, "I'm not going to be the guy who holds you back. If this is what you want, go for it." Her chest ached, and she hated how much he wanted to cry. "And what about us?" His expression didn't waver. "We figure it out." She searched his face for doubt, any sign that he was just saying the right words to make her feel better. But there was none. Only certainty. "You don't have to choose between me and your dreams, Maya. I don't want you to." A lump formed in her throat. For weeks, she'd been building this wall between them, brick by brick, convinced it was the only way to protect her future. But now, hearing him say that, he wasn't the wall. He was the hand reaching over it. "Why do you have to be so—" she started, but the words caught. "Honest," he offered, smirking. "Impossible," she whispered. He chuckled, the sound a bomb. "You already knew that." She looked at him, really looked. The man who had picked her up in a storm. The man who drank her coffee like it was sacred. The man who could have walked away and didn't. Whatever she decided, he was willing to stay. And suddenly, the choice didn't seem so impossible anymore. Maya didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above her bed, replaying every word Colton had said. Every look. Every pause, the way he didn't try to convince her to stay, but somehow made her feel like she still could, like he'd be waiting either way. And wasn't that the scariest part? That she might actually believe him. She rose before dawn, pulled her hoodie over her tank top, and went for a walk. The streets were still sleeping, quiet, except for the distant hiss of the ocean and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Her flip-flops scuffed against the sidewalk as she passed the shuttered surf shops and dimly lit porches. The island had always felt like home, safe, familiar. But lately, it felt like a place she was about to leave behind. And she didn't know if she was ready for that. She passed a corner where a group of kids used to chalk the sidewalk. The drawings had faded with the rain, just like everything else. By the time the sun had fully risen, she found herself sitting on the edge of the dock near the beach, her legs dangling over the water, eyes fixed on the horizon. The waves moved in a rhythm that had comforted her since childhood. But this morning, even the ocean couldn't calm the storm inside her. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a long second before unlocking it. Dozens of unread texts. Not from Colton, this time. From her sister, Malia, even her mom. "Hey, heard about the offer. That's huge. You gonna go?" Mom said she's proud no matter what you decide. Also, you look like a zombie today. Just saying. Maya huffed a quiet laugh, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite herself. But then she opened the one text she hadn't read yet. The last one Colton had sent before he stopped trying. "Whatever you decide, just know I meant it. All of it." She stared at the screen, heart hammering. She'd been so afraid of how deeply she felt for him, of how real it had all become. She'd convinced herself it wasn't serious, wasn't lasting, that it couldn't be. But she missed him. Not the millionaire, not the headlines. Just him. The way he leaned over the counter like it was the only place he wanted to be. The way he listened when she talked about coffee like she was talking about a lost art. The way he looked at her like she wasn't just enough. She wasn't just enough. She was everything. She'd ghosted him. She'd shut down, shut him out, told herself she was doing the right thing. But all she'd really done was push away the first person who had ever made her feel truly seen. And now, what if it was too late? Later that day, back at the cafe, she moved through her shift with the grace of a zombie on autopilot. Malia didn't even try to tease her. She just handed Maya a tray of pastries and gave her that big sister glare that said, "Fix it." But Maya didn't know how. Until she stepped outside that evening, her apron still tied at her waist, and nearly ran straight into him. Colton. Colton. Her breath caught. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His usual confidence was there, but it was quieter now, like something had been chipped away over the past few days. His eyes locked on hers, unblinking, as if he was still waiting for an answer she hadn't given. "Maya," he said, his voice low and tired. "Why are you avoiding me?" She tried to look away, tried to breathe past the lump in her throat. But he reached for her wrist, gently, firmly, stopping her. "Just tell me the truth," he said. "Was it really about the money, or were you just scared?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he was right. He stepped closer, searching her face. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." Her heart cracked. She squeezed her eyes shut, her defenses shattering. "Because you're too perfect, Colton," she whispered. He blinked. "What?" She looked up at him, raw and real. "You have everything. Money, options, a future. I'm just a girl who brews coffee and missed the bus." His expression softened. Slowly, his hand slid down, cupping hers. Her breath hitched. "I don't care where you come from," he said. "I care about you." She didn't move. Couldn't. The truth settled in her chest like warm light breaking through clouds. Then, quietly, he said, "Tell me you don't feel the same, and I'll walk away." She couldn't. Because she did. So instead, she kissed him. The sun had barely risen when Maya sat on the front porch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The glow of the screen lit up her tired face, casting pale light over the email she'd opened at least 10 times since dawn. The words didn't change. "Dear Mins, Kahlua, we are thrilled to offer you the position of cafe manager at Kai Beans, Oahu. We believe your passion and expertise will be a valuable addition to our growing team." It was everything she had worked for, on paper at least. Better pay, full benefits, a chance to manage an upscale cafe in the heart of Honolulu, a stepping stone, a career move, the kind of opportunity she had once dreamed of. And yet, her heart wasn't racing with excitement. It was heavy, unsure. She rested the phone against her forehead, eyes closed. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To grow, to prove she was more than just a barista on an island barely seen on the map. But the idea of packing up and leaving felt like betrayal. To her home, to her family, to herself, and to Colton. She hadn't told him yet. She didn't know how. Part of her was afraid of what he'd say. But the bigger part, it was afraid of what he wouldn't. Later that morning, back at the cafe, she moved like a ghost behind the counter. Pouring shots, steaming milk, nodding at regulars, but never really present. Malia noticed immediately. "You've been acting like someone stole your dog," she said, passing Maya a fresh batch of croissants. "Spill it." Maya hesitated. "I got a job offer." Malia blinked. "A real one?" "Yeah. Ahu. Big cafe. Manager position." Malia's eyes lit up.
Girl, that's amazing. That's what you've been waiting for.
Maya nodded slowly, brushing a crumb off the counter. "I guess." Malia tilted her head.
Okay, what's the... What?
Maya bit her lip. "It's far. I'd have to move. Start over. Leave everything." Malia crossed her arms. "You mean leave Colton?" Maya didn't answer right away. The truth was all over her face. "Have you told him?" "No, not yet." Malia let out a dramatic sigh. "Girl, what are you waiting for?" If I had a tall, brooding cowboy wrapped around my finger, I'd be announcing life updates hourly. Maya gave her a half-hearted smile, but her stomach churned. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted him to say. "Don't go." That felt selfish. "I'll go with you." That felt unrealistic. Maybe the truth was, she was scared he wouldn't say anything at all. That evening, as if summoned by fate, or perfect dramatic timing, his truck was already parked out front when she stepped outside. The late afternoon sun glinted off the windshield, and there he was, leaning against the hood, like he belonged there, like he always had. Her breath caught. He looked up as she approached, his eyes locking onto hers with that same quiet intensity. "All right," he said, arms crossed. "What's going on?" Maya stopped a few feet away, heart pounding. "You always show up when I least expect it. Maybe you've just been expecting me more often." She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. She exhaled slowly, then finally said it. "I got a job offer." His expression didn't change much, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, the breath he didn't take right away. "Oh, she added. "They want me to manage a cafe out there." He nodded once, then twice. "Okay." That was it. Her heart sank a little. okay? He studied her. Isn't that what you wanted? I thought so, she admitted. But now, I don't know. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Are you scared of leaving? He asked softly. Or scared of what happens if you stay? She looked down. Both. His voice was low, steady. Maya. Her eyes stung. But what about us? He didn't hesitate. We figure it out. She searched his face. You're not mad? No, he said. I'm proud. And in that moment, she saw it. The way he believed in her. Not just in the version of her who stayed, but in every version. And for the first time since she opened that email, she could finally breathe. The next morning, Maya stood on the edge of the cliff just beyond her backyard, where the grass thinned and gave way to jagged volcanic rock. Below, the waves crashed against the shore in a familiar rhythm, sending bursts of white foam into the air. She had stood in this exact spot 100 times before, but never with a choice this big pressing down on her chest. In her hand was the contract. Printed, highlighted, signed. Almost. All she had to do was scan it, send it back, and a new life would begin. New apartment, new job, new everything. But nothing about it felt right. She looked out at the ocean, at the sky still brushed with soft pinks and golds, at the plumeria tree nearby that her grandmother planted the year Maya was born. This was home. The island was in her blood, in her bones. Every grain of sand, every afternoon rain, every roadside food truck. It wasn't just where she lived. It was part of who she was. She thought about Colton. His hands around a coffee cup, the way he laughed at himself when he mispronounced Hawaiian words, how he listened like every word she said was a treasure map. He had never once made her feel small, even when the rest of the world had tried to. And when she told him about the offer, he didn't panic or guilt her or try to hold her back. He simply stood there and said, "We'll figure it out." That was love, wasn't it? Not possession, not fear. Support. Trust. Letting someone fly, even if it meant they might fly away. She looked down at the contract again. It was a great opportunity, but it wasn't her opportunity. Her dream wasn't about managing someone else's cafe in someone else's city. Her dream was here, on this island, in a little shop she built from the ground up, with her recipes, her story, her heart infused into every cup. She smiled, small at first, then full and sure. The decision was made. That evening, the beach was nearly empty. Just a few fishermen packing up and a couple of kids skipping stones near the tide pools. The sun hung low, casting a golden sheen across the ocean, making everything look like it had been dipped in light. Colton was already there, standing barefoot in the sand, hands tucked into his pockets. When he saw her walking toward him, he straightened slightly, his gaze holding steady. "So," he said, voice soft but unreadable.
What's it going to be, Hawaii girl?
Maya stopped a few feet away, heart thudding in her chest. "I'm staying," she said. His brow lifted. "Because of me?" She shook her head. "Because of me." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then the slowest, most breathtaking smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he murmured, "because I wasn't planning on letting you go anyway." She laughed, that weight inside her chest dissolving all at once.
Really?
"Really? Really?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of sea salt and sun on his skin. And then, just as the sky turned from gold to rose, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maya froze. "What are you?" "I wasn't planning on doing this tonight," he said, his voice a little rough. "But if there's one thing you've taught me, It's that life doesn't always follow the plan. And then he dropped to one knee. The waves hushed, the wind stilled. Maya's heart felt like it was holding its breath. "I love you," Colton said, looking up at her with every ounce of sincerity she'd ever seen in a man's eyes. Not just in the sweet, summer, fling kind of way, but in the, this is forever kind of way. I love you when you're quiet, when you're loud, when you're right, and even when you ghost me for 3 days straight. She let out a choked laugh, blinking fast. "So," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me, Hawaii girl?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded, voice barely a whisper. "Yes, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, laughing through tears, as the sun slipped below the horizon and the waves rolled on behind them. She had chosen to stay, and in doing so, she had found everything she'd ever been looking for. 1 year later, the cafe on the corner of Banyan Street was no longer just a dream. It was a living, breathing part of the island. The building had been an old fishing supply shop, its wooden beams weathered but solid. Now, it stood freshly painted in seafoam green and soft coral, with hanging baskets of bougainvillea and a hand-carved sign that read, "Maya's Brew." Locals called it the Little Cafe with the Big Soul. And they weren't wrong. Inside, the scent of roasted Kona beans blended with warm banana muffins, and the hum of laughter and espresso machines filled the air. Maya moved behind the counter with ease, pouring lattes, greeting regulars by name, adjusting the chalkboard menu when inspiration struck. There was something electric about the way she carried herself now. Rooted, confident, exactly where she was meant to be. Business was steady, even growing. Tourists wandered in after hearing about the authentic Hawaiian coffee experience, but it was the locals who gave the place its pulse. Maya had designed it that way. She made sure her suppliers were island-based. Beans from a family farm up north, pastries from a baker down the road, taro and honey straight from weekend market vendors she'd known since childhood. It hadn't been easy. Starting a business never was. There had been delays with permits, a few sleepless nights balancing the books, and more than one plumbing disaster. But Maya never once considered giving up. Not when Colton stood beside her through it all. He wasn't just the man who kissed her under stormy skies or proposed barefoot in the sand. He became her partner in the truest sense. Colton never tried to take over. He didn't throw around money or demand a name on the sign. He simply asked, "What do you need?" and made it happen quietly, whether that was securing a small business grant, hauling tables through the rain, or fixing the leaky sink himself because hiring someone would take too long. And now every morning, he showed up at the cafe not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That morning, Maya stood at the counter, refilling a ceramic jar of raw sugar, when the familiar squeak of the front door caught her attention. She didn't need to look. She felt it. Colton stepped inside, the light breeze lifting the edge of his linen shirt. He was carrying a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over, and the moment their eyes met, he smiled like it was the first time, all over again. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes," he said, placing the bag gently on the counter. Maya rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling. "It's Kahlua in the cafe, remember? I have a reputation to maintain." He leaned in, kissed her temple, and murmured, "Yeah, for breaking hearts with your cold brew." She laughed, swatting him with a dish rag. "You're such a tourist." Correction, supportive husband and investor. Investor, she raised a brow. "I don't remember approving your application." He opened the bag, revealing 2 perfectly flaky almond croissants. Bribery? Now you're speaking my language. As they bantered, the cafe filled with more customers. Some familiar, some new. A couple on their honeymoon took photos of their lattes. An older woman who had been coming every Thursday since opening smiled as Maya placed her usual papaya scone on the table. A group of teenagers from the high school down the road laughed over iced matches and shared playlists through wireless earbuds. Maya looked around, heart swelling. But it wasn't just the cafe that had grown, it was what they gave back. In the back room, stacked neatly against the wall, were boxes of supplies for their monthly community breakfast, an idea Colton had casually pitched one night over dinner. What if we fed the folks who can't afford to come here? He'd said, and now, once a month, the doors opened early and anyone could come in for a hot cup of coffee and a fresh meal. No questions asked. Maya watched as Colton chatted with a volunteer, handing off the donation bin like it was part of his daily routine. And that's when it hit her. They hadn't just built a business. They'd built a home. For themselves. For others. For the island that raised her. And for the man who helped her believe she could take up space in the world. She stepped out from behind the counter, slid her arms around Colton's waist from behind, and rested her chin on his shoulder. You know, she whispered, this still feels a little like a dream. He turned, his smile soft and familiar. Then I hope we never wake up. The late afternoon sun streamed through the cafe's wide-open windows, bathing everything in a honeyed light. Dust motes danced lazily in the air, and the sound of waves crashing a few blocks away drifted in like background music, soft and rhythmic. Maya stood by the espresso machine, wiping down the counter even though it didn't need it. Her eyes kept flicking toward the door, even though she'd sworn to herself she wouldn't be the type to watch and wait. But today was different. Today, she had something to say. Something bigger than any special on the menu board. Colton had been gone all morning, off meeting with a few local vendors about expanding their small cafe into a second location. It was his idea, of course, but not in a pushy way. He never pushed it. He nudged, gently, like ocean waves on the shore, encouraging, never demanding. When he believed in something, or someone, he let them take the lead, always ready to step in with steady hands if things began to shake. That was who he was. That's why she loved him. The bell over the door chimed. Maya's heart jumped. Colton stepped in, his hair windswept, a little sun-kissed from the drive along the coast. He carried a folder under one arm, and his smile was relaxed, confident, the kind that still made her knees a little weak, even after a year of marriage. He walked straight to the counter, leaned in, and kissed her on the cheek before sliding onto the nearest stool. "Guess what?" he said, flipping open the folder. "The taro farm in Hanalei is in. They want to supply us for the next 3 months. No middleman." Maya blinked. "Seriously, that's huge." "Yup," he grinned. "Said it's because of your lavender taro latte." Apparently, their aunt cried when she tasted it. She laughed, heart swelling. "That was mostly your milk frothing skills, cowboy." He leaned closer. "Are you saying we make a good team?" "I'm saying," she replied, her voice quieter now, "I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else." He paused, his smile softened. "What's going on?" She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small, folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a contract, not an invoice or vendor order, just something she'd been working on late at night when the cafe was closed and the world was still. She handed it to him. Colton unfolded it, eyebrows raised. His eyes scanned the page. Lines of handwritten notes, sketches, a mock-up logo. "Is this?" Maya nodded. "It's a concept for the second location. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I know we said we'd wait another year, but I don't know. Something about today just felt right. I can see it, Colton, not just a copy of what we have here, but something a little different, still rooted in the island. Still us, but its own thing." He looked up at her, eyes filled with something bright and proud. "You really want to do this?" "I do," she said, "with you." He stared at her for a long moment before folding the paper carefully, like it was something sacred. Then, he took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Let's build it," he said simply. Maya felt a rush of emotion so strong she had to blink back tears. Because it wasn't just about another cafe. It was about the life they were building together, one choice at a time, one small dream turning into something real. A customer called from the corner table, asking for a refill, and Maya gently pulled away, pressing a kiss to the top of Colton's head before grabbing the coffee pot. But as she moved through the cafe, refilling mugs, offering smiles, laughing with regulars, she kept glancing back toward him. There he was, sitting at the counter, studying her notes, sipping coffee, smiling to himself like he had everything he ever needed right there. And maybe he did. Maya returned to the counter and rested her chin on his shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "this whole second location idea, it's gonna be a lot." "I know. There's gonna be stress, sleepless nights, maybe even a few arguments." Colton turned slightly, brushing his nose against hers. "I'm counting on it." She smiled. "Still want to do it?" "With you," he said, eyes gleaming. "Always." And in that moment, Maya knew. They weren't just building cafes. They were building a future. Together, one cup at a time. The rain had returned, but this time it was softer, gentler, like a blessing rather than a warning. It drizzled over the rooftops and washed the island in a silvery sheen as Maya stood in the doorway of her cafe, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. The street was mostly quiet, just a few early risers braving the weather, and the familiar scent of espresso and ocean salt clung to the air like a second skin. Behind her, the cafe hummed with life. The warm clink of ceramic cups, the soft laughter of morning regulars, the hiss of milk frothing. It was all part of the rhythm now. A rhythm she had built, a home she had made. But today wasn't just another work day. Today marked exactly 1 year since she had opened the doors to Maya's Brew. 1 year since she'd looked Colton in the eyes on that cliffside and told him she was staying. 1 year since he had dropped to one knee with his heart in his hands and asked her to say yes to forever. She had. And every day since had been a choice to say it again. "Maya," came Colton's voice behind her, low and familiar, wrapped in warmth. "You gonna keep staring at the clouds or come help me with these?" She turned to see him balancing 2 large cardboard boxes in his arms, soaked slightly at the edges. He was smiling, but there was a glint of mischief in his eyes. "What are those?" she asked, stepping forward and helping relieve him of one. He shrugged. "Delivery from the print shop. New packaging for the gift sets." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You redesigned the packaging?" He leaned closer. "I had help." She opened one of the boxes, gently parting the paper filler to reveal a sleek, minimalistic design. Simple craft paper bags stamped with her cafe's logo, a wave motif curling through the letters, and underneath it, a new phrase in subtle gold ink. "Brewed with aloha, shared with love." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "You like it?" Colton asked, suddenly a bit hesitant. Maya couldn't speak at first. She just nodded. Colton reached out and brushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear. It felt right. Like, this place isn't just coffee anymore. It's something people take with them. Like a piece of us. She exhaled slowly, touched in a way she hadn't expected. It's perfect. They carried the boxes inside just as the rain picked up again, and by the time they'd unpacked everything, the cafe was beginning to fill. Locals, tourists, surfers with dripping boards leaning against the railing. Maya greeted them all like family, like the shy girl who once brewed coffee alone in the back room no longer existed. Later that afternoon, as the drizzle tapered off and sunlight filtered through the clouds in lazy beams, Colton pulled her aside. "I have something else for you." Maya eyed him suspiciously. "If it's another surprise business investment, I'm confiscating your credit card." He laughed, pulling a small envelope from his back pocket. It was cream, colored, sealed with a gold sticker in the shape of a coffee bean. "What's this?" "Open it." She did. Inside was a certificate, handwritten in thick black ink. Maya Kalua, Island Small Business of the Year, in recognition of excellence, community impact, and entrepreneurial spirit. She stared at it, blinking slowly. "They're presenting it at the town hall next week," Colton said. "Apparently, word gets around when you feed half the neighborhood and still find time to teach high school kids how to make pour-overs on Saturdays." Maya's hand covered her mouth, emotions swirling too fast to name. "I thought I was just building something small," she whispered. "You did," he said, "and it turned into something big, because of you." Tears welled, but she let them come. Because it wasn't sadness, it was everything else: pride, gratitude, disbelief, joy. She reached for him, and he didn't hesitate. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close, grounding her the way he always did. When she pulled back, she whispered, "You really weren't just a guy passing through, huh?" Colton grinned. "Nope. Turns out I missed my flight. Permanently." And just like that, with laughter between them and the scent of rain still hanging in the air, Maya knew that they had brewed more than coffee in this little shop. They had brewed a life, one they would keep pouring into, together, forever. Life, lesson. Maya and Colton's story reminds us that the most beautiful things in life often come when we least expect them. A missed bus, a rainy night, a spontaneous ride. None of it seemed like the beginning of something extraordinary. But sometimes, it's in the interruptions, the detours, the moments that feel like setbacks, that we find the people and paths we're truly meant for. Love, real love, doesn't demand that we change who we are or abandon our dreams. It supports us, uplifts us, and grows with us. Maya didn't have to choose between her ambition and her heart. She found someone who believed in both, and Colton, a man who had everything money could buy, discovered that true wealth comes from connection, purpose, and sharing a life built from love and respect. This story is about more than romance. It's about courage. The courage to say yes to new beginnings, the bravery to stay rooted in what matters, and the strength to believe in your worth, even when you're scared. So no matter where you come from or where you're headed, remember, you are enough. Your dreams are valid, and the right people will never ask you to shrink in order to be loved. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What part moved you the most? And where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more heartfelt, emotional tales that remind us what truly matters. Because sometimes, the best stories begin with something as simple as a missed bus.